Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations Cafe. I am your host, Carl Evans, Senior Director of Operations at Hope for the Day, and I am so honored and excited for you to join us tonight. This episode, titled having our guests on from Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, is another excellent episode. We're going to be discussing the great work being put on by this organization and some upcoming events. And a lot of the topics we're going to be talking about cycle around a few different activities that are consistent with Hope for the Day's ongoing operations. When we talk about proactive suicide prevention, this is about normalizing conversations about providing outreach and education and getting invested into communities to create a social policy that's backed up by institutional policies that support mental health. And one of the things that we're always looking to do is talk about mental health in its comprehensive viewpoint and make sure that we're breaking down compartments and stigmas and misunderstandings. And our guests tonight are going to be connected to talking about an event that largely connects to something called food insecurity. And when people think about mental health, there's part of stigma that tends to create a compartment that makes you think that it's entirely isolated to the conditions within someone's mind or to have a singular experience that could be traumatic, and that's what people are coping with. Or they have an ongoing diagnosed illness, and again, it's from a genetic basis, and that this constitutes the whole discussion of mental health. Living inside of the realities of the current pandemic, people who maybe have never fit the criteria of a genetic-based mental illness and may not personally report having experienced something they think of as trauma are experiencing what we at Hope for the Day talk about as psychological injuries. Because oftentimes when we think of trauma, stigma makes us think that the word trauma has to have a certain hierarchy, a certain scale. And that's just not true. That hierarchy and scale can make people dismiss any number of things that are injurious and harmful to our overall mental health that create what we at Hope for the Day say is a psychological injury. The pandemic and the pressures and stressors is doing that for just about everyone across the globe, and particularly in America. If they've felt an unease, uncertainty, some sort of disruption in their well-being. And that's a small example that people might be able to connect to, but an ongoing one long before the pandemic sort of impacted our communities worldwide and recently this year, is a thing such as food insecurity and access to resources within our communities. And there's a lot of things, but we're focusing on something that's connected to the idea of public health, not just access to hospitals and doctors and clinicians, which is essential, and there are lots of deficiencies there, but the idea of food and access to affordable food, healthy foods, that whole dynamic. And it isn't just when you think of food security, people might tend to think in a very sort of stigmatized, structured way that they're talking about an underdeveloped country where people have to depend on a crop to be raised and grown. And if that crop doesn't grow, they won't be able to eat because they live in a social structure where they have to harvest and directly and eat their food. But food insecurity exists across all nations and all geographies. Food insecurity is a major issue in America. In fact, where we can see, if you look at research from the National Institute of Mental Health, from the CDC, you'll consistently see that nearly 1 in 3 individuals in America will experience some sort of mental health challenge or disorder within their lifetime. But when we talk about food insecurity, it's only recently, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, that people have really started to make the case that food insecurity can have a direct correlation to mental health, to impacting the quality and creating mental health challenges for individuals. In fact, as an example, one of the more landmark studies in this understanding was published just in 2017 by the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan. And the research there talked about finding that food insecurity may be a key contributor to common mental health disorders, and that it can do things such as provoke a stress response that can contribute to anxiety and depression, that acquiring foods in socially unacceptable ways can induce feelings of alienation, powerlessness, shame, and guilt that are associated with depression. Food insecurity may also magnify socioeconomic disparities within our households and communities that create further disruptions, along with cultural sensitivities. Access to food could be having to use food stamps and things like that, or just having a low level of income and the social anxieties that go along with that. So when we talk about the idea of food insecurity, it's part of the bigger context of understanding how we improve our mental health. It's important that hopefully today we lead with "it's okay not to be okay," because that's trying to destigmatize mental health within your internal self and among your peer groups. But we're not doing the mental health discussion any justice if we think that it's just exclusively about the relationship between a person getting to mental health services and licensed clinicians, which is a central foundation part. But mental health is also about the way our societies are structured and how they impact us on a day-to-day basis. And food insecurity has become one of those things where nowadays there are people who say, well, of course it's part of mental health, but that was not the status quo. That was not a commonly understood thing, that having this uncertainty, having these anxieties, having these different sorts of deficiencies in one's day-to-day life could create severe injurious impact to someone's mental health conditions. And our guests tonight, the topic of the show, or the title of the show rather, is talking about an organization that we've collaborated with on a number of different initiatives. Christopher LeMark, who has been the founder of the organization Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, whose goal is designed to normalize and destigmatize therapy and mental health services. And they've been working primarily in the south and west sides of Chicago. They've been guests in our talks on intersectional topics related to mental health and focusing on initiatives that they've done. Recently this summer, we focused on a food drive initiative as part of combating food insecurity and trying to contribute to situations that have been brought up by the pandemic and maybe were further exacerbated if there was already food insecurity before. You may have been able to catch Christopher LeMark and the entire organization, Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, as they just had an amazing mental health day experience that we're going to talk a little bit about last Saturday on October 10th, in which they were featured at Chicago's AT&T flagship. And they had an amazing experience tying together self-expression and conversations that we'll review a little bit, because we're also going to talk about an upcoming event that's taking place at the end of October that is a free farmers market and is designed to, again, make a direct impact into communities where there are shortages and need. So without further ado, I want to bring on our guests. We have both Christopher LeMark, of course, is going to be joining us, and several other guests and representatives of Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, the organization. So let's get our guests on right away and get rocking and rolling. First, let's make sure, Chris, welcome back. Can we see you? Can we hear you? You go. Make sure we got the mute thing off. I think you're still on mute. Yeah. Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Let's get Brittany on. Brittany, can we see you? Can we hear you?
Hi.
Hello. And then we've got Fabrice. Can we see you? Can we hear you? Make sure we can
see. Hello.
I definitely heard you. I don't know if I can see you yet. Oh, there you are. Perfect.
Hey.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And for our audience, we've had the honor of having Chris on a number of times, but Chris, please reintroduce yourself and these we consider part of your, and then we'll meet for our first time, Brittany and Fabrice as well. So let's kick it off with Chris.
This is Christopher Lamarck, the founder of Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health. I've been an artist in Chicago for 20 years. And as of 2018, I started the rumblings of creating this vehicle, which is Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health, to later launch officially on July 7, 2019. And we spent a lot of time really impacting the neighborhood with conversation, discussing boundary and depression and several forms of abuse and just really giving people an opportunity to share light on some of the things that they may be dealing with internally. And of course, once COVID hit, we had to pivot and really meet people where they are. And that's when we started to tackle food insecurity and the many food deserts in the South Side. So happy to be here again. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Chris. And let's go over to Fabrice.
Hello. My name is Dr. Fabrice Lubin. I am a licensed clinical psychologist based in Chicago. I am the founder of a private practice organization called For Real Therapy, which also has a community space related, which is called For Real Spaces. And we basically believe that therapy is not an individual problem, it is a communal one.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Dr. Fabrice. And Brittany.
Hi, so my name is Brittany Rogers. I'm a therapist by profession. I am a licensed professional counselor and a certified alcohol and drug counselor, and I also have taken up life coaching. I just started my own business, Therapeutic services, which acts as a hub of all the things that I want to be able to offer to my community. I think because systemically, therapy is not always accessible. I had the idea of trying to figure out how I could use my skills and my degree and my license in as many ways as possible. So through that, I offer group facilitations for different businesses or organizations. I do life coaching as a way to kind of meet the need of people who can't necessarily afford therapy. And, people can book me for speaking engagements. I do workshops, just information that I feel like should be shared with the masses, and you shouldn't have to go to treatment to get it because everybody could benefit from it.
Excellent. And thank you all for joining us. And, so today there's a few different things we wanted to touch on. Sort of a line item or sort of a signature item is that Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health will be hosting a free farmers market on October 30th to the 31st. It'll be, we're going to be promoting the information. It's going to be in Boxville neighborhood, just off of 51st. And we'll be promoting that information. But one of the things I wanted to touch on right from the get-go today was actually the association between all three of you kicked off from that event I talked about at the top of the episode on World Mental Health Day. You all got to be part of an experience that was produced. And could you talk a little bit about that? Because I wanted to sort of echo that conversation a little bit today and talk about that amazing event and moment you put on. Chris, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. AT&T is is our first community partner, which is a blessing, right? We launched in July 2019. I started talking with them in September, and by November 3rd of last year, we put on our first live event, which is pre-COVID. And it was a blessing for us to come back. We was trying to figure it out since May. How would we create this virtual event, considering that we still wanted to normalize therapy, even in the midst of COVID, right? And so we spent many months just trying to figure this thing out. And so when we set a date and we figured it out and we said, hey, let's just go ahead and do it on World Mental Health Day, which of course was 10/10/2020. I wanted to do something different this time, and I wanted to reach out to three incredible voices that could really echo the sentiments of what we needed to talk about. And so I reached out to Brittany, and she can expound more because she doesn't approach this therapy thing from a traditional standpoint. She's relatable. She has worked with me several times as we were working with the teens and mental health program that we were working on prior to COVID. And so she's just a great personality, and she brings a lot to the table. So that was cool to have her on the panel. And then being able to work with Cal Santillion from WGCI, who's been a huge supporter since we started this beautiful concept. And then just having like the support of AT&T and WGCI and Starbucks and DJ Firm and all those different people that played a part. But to even go further, to bring in Kayla, she's not here. Kayla Jeter, she couldn't be on tonight, but she's a fitness enthusiast and a mindful and wellness coach, and she added a lot to the panel. She's an incredible spirit, survivor story, and she added a lot to the conversation. And of course, Dr. Fabrice Lubin, we were able to communicate months ago, and we had a very open conversation at Sip and Savor Coffee Shop about how can we normalize therapy and how can we just bridge the gap continually by working together. So it was just nice to bring all these different worlds together, because I act as a facilitator and an advocate of mental health, but the panel is really for the experts to shed light so we can help the people who are searching for therapy or looking to understand more about therapy. This event was a way for us to really open it up and talk about the power of therapy, how we can better leverage it so we can manage our lives. And it was just an amazing time to have this conversation.
That's perfect. And thank you for really illustrating that experience, because, you know, we hope they're going to continue and continue to grow. And that's a perfect entry point, because I opened up talking about food insecurity as a point of understanding the full spectrum of what it takes to sort of improve on mental health. And Dr. Fabrice and Brittany, you represent other essential elements in that, you know, I'd like you to sort of talk about, because, you know, so that we're not dancing around it. When we talk about sort of normalizing therapy, we're also talking about cultural intersections in which stigma works to keep us silent through different sorts of misunderstandings and presumptions. But the power that you all possess is also about a representational factor that is also not traditionally, or was not traditionally, appreciated in what it takes to sort of open up conversations. And I thought, maybe Brittany, you could start us off sort of talking about where Chris was talking about your sort of unique approach to things. Just kick us off there a little bit about how you approach this conversation.
Yeah, so I think it's extremely important to do things differently. I think that traditional therapy is really rooted in a Western, American, Caucasian framework. If you've looked at any of the pioneers of psychology and mental health, a lot of them started off as like white men or white women. And so, of course, things have evolved since then, and we have so many more theories and perspectives to treat people with, especially people of color, Black people, and people who people who are in communities where mental health is extremely stigmatized. And so Chris used to talk to me about why do I consider myself to be non-traditional, or why do I use that term? And really, I started using it as a way to distance myself from the negative stigma that people typically have around traditional therapy. Now, am I doing anything different than a bunch of my colleagues are right now? No, because a lot of therapists nowadays would be considered non-traditional because we are not sticking to one form of treatment to treat one population. Like, we've had to really expound into African-American psychology and understanding epigenetics and how our trauma has traveled histories through our mental health, through our physical health, in all of these different ways. So I think it's important to highlight the fact that, especially with the work that I do, I want to be as relatable as possible, because I feel like that's the only way we get through this wall, is by having more professionals that people see and they're like, man, I feel like I could talk to somebody that looks like that, or I feel like they would be able to understand me. As superficial as it might be to judge off of, just looks, but that means a lot to people, and how you present yourself and how important it is that you want to be a change maker in your community. I think is what takes somebody from just being a regular therapist to being an amazing therapist, to being a therapist that really wants to make change.
Thank you for further elaborating on that. And it's so critical to have your voice and these approaches in, because of the fact that, as you've perfectly underscored, when we talk about stigma, again, it just sounds like a buzzword, but filling in, it's a perfectly usable tool, because we at Hope for the Day talk about stigma as being social and cultural factors that try to dictate how we express ourselves. And sometimes it's not as just apparent as, well, boys don't cry. I mean, that's certainly an internal navigation, but there's another institutional misnomer in there, that a sort of one size fits all, in which the size was measured and shaped by voices that don't have any sort of appreciation or relationship to different intersections. And it's ethnic, it's cultural, it can be spiritual. And sometimes it's not as malicious as thinking of people and like as you're a secondary human being. It can be a little more like subtle, on that people may just dismiss. Like, what if spirituality is a deep part of feeling your sense of completeness? What if perhaps certain language and terms that you might think are institutionally appropriate may be offensive to someone? Those things that may never occur to you. And that's hardly, scratching the surface, but it's so critical, to have people like you, Brittany, committed to endeavoring in and pushing forward. And Dr. Lubin, I'm going to flip-flop between Dr. Fabrice and Dr. Lubin over and over again. But like, let me know what you prefer. I don't want to disrespect, but
Dr. Fabrice is fine. That's all.
Okay, Dr. Fabrice, sort of piggybacking on that, if you could talk about sort of where you're coming from on this with your organization, for real. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I have been in the mental health field as a professional for about 10 years. I've worked, this is actually something I talked about with Brittany. Her and I have both worked in pretty much every sector. That includes college counseling, VA, community mental health, hospitals, private practice. Pretty much anywhere where mental health was provided, I was there or worked within those organizations. One of the things that I started to observe, and it's just very, very clear, when you are a person of color and you're in these environments, you're generally working within a very white systematic environment. So what that means is you're looking at 86 to 87% of the clinical field, the mental health clinical field, is represented by white individuals. And when you're looking at that, a lot of it is it's not even reflective of our population. It's not reflective of our country. It's not reflective of where we're at even within the community. So what you're seeing in many ways is you're going to see a lot of people are coming into mental health settings, and similar to what you were saying and you identified so well, Carl, is that there's these symbols, there's these appropriate images that they're using. There's just even the layout of a space and how you're taken from intake to therapy session, what's explained to you, what's not explained to you, what's a HIPAA compliance, what is what are the rules and regulations around if you admit to drug use or if you've been to jail? All of these types of different factors may be taken for granted. You may not be considering these aspects about this person because you've never come from those communities. You've never lived in those lives. You've never worked in those types of communities before. So in my 10 years of experience, I started to feel really, truly disappointed by the way that the mental health field was treating and approaching and interacting with the individual. It was as if we were looking at people and hearing their problems. And if I worked, for example, I worked predominantly for a while at the Kennedy King Community College, which is located near Englewood in that area. And one of the things that I observed a lot of the time when I was working there is individuals would come in and they would have had no exposure to intimate conversations, to any sort of mental health dialogue. So imagine that some of these people had been hospitalized for the first time in their lives, and they're reporting certain things that have happened to them in their past experiences. And the person on the other end of that is there to judge, label, or mark some of their experiences without really understanding or grasping what are the challenges that these communities face as a whole, right? So when you're coming from poverty and you're talking about food insecurity, you're talking about a lot of people who come from environments where they're not actually given the appropriate things to take care of themselves, to feed their families, to live healthy lives. And then you're going to use those markers and you're going to say, well, we're going to label you as bipolar. We're going to label you as having attention deficit. Or and you're not actually considering these deeper systemic factors that could be impacting that one individual in that moment. So part of my value system that has shaped over the last few years is I wanted to create an organization that really spoke to the community level and a community approach towards mental health. So what I did was in 2018, I left a private practice group and went on my own. And I started to observe that there were, I had a board behind me and it was like a whiteboard. And what I started doing is I started writing down things that were showing up in session that was kind of new or interesting or relatable. And I wouldn't erase it. I would leave it up there. And what would happen is I would have client after client. It could be white, it could be black, it could be older, younger, anybody. And they would start to look at this board and they would start to kind of say like, wow, like that thing that you have up there, Fab, that's me. And I'm like, well, that was written by like a 47 Puerto Rican woman, right? Like, and I'm talking to like a 20-year-old college kid from like Nebraska. And I started to realize that maybe the issues that human beings are like actually facing, they're not individual issues. They're actually a part of like larger systemic issues. And therapy often is removed. I think something that Brittany was talking about is therapy is often removed from that relatability. So what you have is you have individuals coming in and they're giving up their privacy, their power, and they're giving it to this therapist. They're giving it to this clinician. And as a clinician, you start to see like all these people, you're getting all these stories and you start to realize like, whoa, like something's happening here. Like these two clients that I just met with talked about the same issue. They have the same struggle. They talked about it in the same way, but those two people will never meet, right? They're never going to talk in the waiting room. They're never going to have a conversation. In fact, there are like rules and regulations about keep everybody apart. Don't let them connect, right? That to me is what Brittany was even talking about when she's referring to like a very like Caucasian and white Eurocentric version of therapy, that things are meant to be kept private, right? Which ultimately I feel leads to disenfranchisement. You're putting people into these sectors so they can't connect, they can't meet. So last year, what I endeavored to do is we rented out a space above a Starbucks in Wicker, which is so crazy looking at some of the conversations I've had with Christopher LeMark now. But what we did was the whole thing was like, I was like, I'm not going to put regular seats. I'm going to put comfortable like floor pillows. We're going to have like this large platform bed. I didn't want a space where people could not connect. I wanted people to purposefully connect. I wanted it to be a space of reflection and contemplation. And I tried my best to not like appropriate from like Eastern religion or anything like that, because I was like, I'm Haitian. I'm not an Asian person from Indonesia who's a practicing Tibetan Buddhist. I live in Chicago where it's cold, right? So when you're entering into a space, I wanted to have a space that reflected mindfulness, peace, and tranquility in an urban way, in an urban environment, so that this way people could see these symbols and they could think, well, how can I find peace within my community? If Fabrice and his organization is able to build this, how can I try to build something like that out there? So we took like a space that was very tiny and we renovated it and we turned it into this, like, I call it kind of like a heart space. So it became like a heart space where, in my mind, maybe the world is harsh out there, but in here, we're going to be strong. In here, we're going to support you. In here, we're going to have access to dialogues and community mental health stuff that you normally wouldn't have. That was my plan. And then COVID happened. And so a lot of that now has to be revamped, but I'm doing that work now in terms of connecting with coffee, hip hop, and mental health, and starting to like do panels and some of the stuff and the speaking engagements that Brittany's relating. So that was a long rant. Sorry, y'all.
It was good.
No,
it was good.
Too long at all. Great. And I mean, that's aside from the fact that we, part of resilience is finding adjustments, to reality. It's important for folks, our audience and anyone else who engages this in the days afterwards to learn about these are processes that take a long sort of journey to get going. And more importantly, I think it's important for people to hear what the growing story is, what the growing pains are, that your work, and I'm going to extend this to Brittany as well, these things didn't just pop up out of the ground. Recognizing the need and trying to figure out how you're going to approach it and tackle these issues. I think one of the problems that we have with trying to resolve, issues that are, especially trying to tackle the mental health thing, is that I'll set aside the cynicism of, maybe people trying to make a quick buck artist and saying like, oh, well, it's just think happy thoughts and off you go. Like, a bigger problem is that, this is such an essential need, but we've had so little history of people doing the deep digging work to really learn us, and I mean us in as broad a sense of like trying to really deep down learn. Brittany, when you're talking about, therapy designed by Caucasian or European male and females and things like that, but that's part of a bigger endemic reality about the lack of research and investigation and appreciation and understanding. As Dr. Fabrice, is you're just also, for the talk articulating, there's so, our understanding and deep perspective of us, of different diverse peoples, is so limited and narrow because the amount of effort and research time, and you see that even like at a medical level with women, right? They study the human cadaver of a man and extrapolate it to a woman. That's a really quick, like sloppy sort of example, but for our own mental health. So I think it's good that we talk about these processes and make people understand that this is not trying to find a more direct connection, is not something that was done overnight with some sort of magic wand. It really did take a lot of trial and error because you both are a part of a continuum of individuals. And I'm speaking sort of clinically, where Chris and Coffee and Hip Hop and Mental Health, where Hope for the Day live, because we're not direct services in a sense, where you all are on the front line here is part of a new endeavor of cutting new paths. There isn't some sort of, set blueprint for you all to inherit. Like, there was no respect for it. So what are your thoughts on that, sort of going back to Chris, where you see it and being able to facilitate platforms, you're bringing communities together that can dramatically be benefited by Brittany and Dr. Fabrice's resources and efforts.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about being a facilitator and being able to produce these experiences is that we are putting people in a position to sort of own their power of expression, being able to talk about boundaries. I didn't learn what boundaries were really until I turned 40. I'm only 41, right? Because I wasn't properly nurtured in a way that someone set me down and said, okay, look, It's okay for you to say this, feel this way, talk about that, because boundaries sort of define who you are, what you like, what you need, what you want, right? And so once I started to learn all these new things, I was excited. And therapy opened up my world, and I wanted to share that with my community because I knew people over the years that was raging on the inside, that was angry and frustrated, and they really needed like a space to vent with no bias, no judgment, no consequences, right? With no shame and no embarrassment. And so like to put people like Fabrice, Dr. Fabrice and Brittany and several other therapists who we have worked with since the inception of Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health has been amazing because we do group therapy, essentially, right? It's like putting everybody in a room and giving everybody the space to just talk. And it's not a debate. It's not about who's smarter, who knows more, who knows less. It's about how can we share the wealth of this knowledge and so we can further this conversation. So that's what the whole normalized therapy campaign came from, because we knew every time we put these therapists in a position to meet these residents, these individuals of Chicago, the people that were suffering on the inside, hiding behind ego, trying to find ways to cope, whether that be self-medication, which is various forms. Now we was introducing a vehicle so people could say, you know what? I can't talk about my stuff. I can't open up about some of these different things, right? And so this is amazing. It's so simple, but it's so powerful because most people, especially considering your family dynamic, you don't even have the space to freely share how you feel, again, without bias, judgment, or consequence. So I'm excited about this idea that I get to bridge these worlds together to introduce to some for the first time the power of therapy. And that's the beauty, like the beautiful thing of having someone like Dr. Fabrice and Brittany, because they're two different people with two different mindsets, two different approaches, but yet they think the same, which is cool because they all have the same experience. But to me, I'm learning to both of them, but I love the fact that even though they are so different, they are the same in a sense because they have a heart to share this knowledge. And I think that's a beautiful space to be in.
I couldn't agree more. And you know, from Brittany and Dr. Fabrice, from your direct experiences, obviously we can't speak for every single time or you know make disclosures, but I wonder from your experiences, what has been some things you've seen consistent with getting people to start conversations? You know, those first time, it could be very likely that a patient for you, someone who's becomes someone that you work with, it could be the very first time they're ever having a mental health discussion. Because, Chris, I know as a fact that when you facilitate and bring an audience together, that could be a first time that they're getting a serious, non-joking, non-dismissive, non-problematic, environment on it. So just if you could touch on the, Brittany and Dr. Fabrice, what might be sort of things you've seen consistent? Is it consistent? I don't want to speak for you, but have you met with people who it's the first time for them talking about it? And what seems to be consistent about that, starting that conversation,
Absolutely. There are a bunch of people who, most people that come to you, it's usually their first time, unless you are you see or specialize in a clientele that have very severe mental illness diagnosis, because they're more likely to have had a longer history of treatment and doing therapy versus people who are a little bit more functional, who just decide like, hey, this is something that's being talked about, let me give it a try. But I think people like Chris are very important. The way we destigmatize mental health and the way we normalize therapy is by discussing it. I think that because Chris has been so brave in using Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health to share his story and his past, that's given a lot of people permission to say like, hey, I can do the same thing and I can find a safe space or a tribe where I will be understood. And there, one thing we joke about is the fact that, especially in Chicago, since Chris has kind of started this, there have been other organizations or other people who want to kind of create the same picture, because they do understand how necessary and important it is for these conversations to be happening. So I think that when it comes to, commonalities as far as what therapists typically do is you have to find a way to connect to begin with. Like that's how you start rapport, even if it's with somebody you never met. Two people who don't know anything about each other can probably find something to bond over when it comes to Netflix or Hulu. Like it's little things like that that show a person like, okay, because the biggest thing with being a therapist is you want to make sure that the client feels that to some degree you're on the same level. They may still feel like they are beneath you in a certain sense, but my job is to make sure that person understands that like I'm not going to talk to you about it, but I got stuff too. It took me a while to get to the place that I am. I more so see that with people who are like in my age bracket, because I work with a lot of millennials. I feel like I specialize in working with millennials. And so they're like, they look at me and they can relate to me, but they also, in a sense, without to my own horn, sometimes feel inspired by me. And that's a beautiful thing to have people who've never given therapy thought to want to, connect and do it with you because they feel like, like I said, you are somebody that can understand or show them the way. But a lot of it for therapists and for us is just explaining the process and making people feel comfortable, letting them know that it's not like you're walking into the doctor and you're getting, your goodies checked for the first time. Like it's so much more comfortable and cooler than that. Like we sit and we talk about whatever it is you want to talk about, and just letting people know what that looks like usually helps them to come around to say like, oh, that don't sound that bad.
I mean, I want to take everything that Brittany said, and I want to kind of give it like a personal spin on it. And I want to pull in some of the stuff that you talked about too, Carl, and that Chris talked about, because all of you have laid down such a good, like a foundation for this discussion. One of the things I would say is as a psychologist myself, I started going to therapy for the first time when I was in grad school after the shooting of my cousin who died. While I was in grad school, I stopped working on my dissertation. I stopped participating in class. I stopped even showing up for class. And after a while, my school just started to fail me. Nobody was checking really in with me emotionally to see how I was doing, because nobody thought it was even their place necessarily. No one was saying like, hey, like, Fab, like, how are you doing with the fact that your cousin was murdered and shot? How do you go as a grad student into environments like Englewood, where you're dealing with clients that are talking about this like a daily reality, and you just went through this very similar thing? No one was checking on me about that. I had a great supervisor who actually started to notice and observe like, hey, and what the most important thing, and this is kind of what I want to relate to your question, Carl, about how do you show up for people in that first time, in those first few moments where you've never been in therapy? You don't want to show up with judgment. You want to show up with what Chris said. You want to show up with an open space dialogue so a person can breathe. A lot of the time people feel like they don't have options. That's what pushes people into pretty much almost a lot of different actions and reactions, is they feel like they don't have options. So for me, I had an amazing supervisor who recognized and said to me, basically, they didn't take it from a negative place. They actually said, I've seen better work from you. I've seen better work from you. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what's been happening with you that is keeping you locked in, that's keeping you isolated. So I opened up about this. So she actually went through the effort of finding me a therapist to go and see. This was a white therapist. And it was the first time I'd ever been in therapy before in my life. So I go to this office downtown Michigan Avenue, right? Like where it's like these pillars of financial success. Talk about like the spoils of capitalism, right? And I remember at the time, I would have almost panic attacks because I didn't grow up in an environment where there's that much money. So I'm like sitting on this leather couch and there's all these books in the background. And I'm like, I felt out of place. My dad had to work an extra job already. So imagine like I come to him and I'm like, hey, I got to do therapy on top of this too, on top of like some of the money he was sending me just to do grad school in Chicago. You know what I mean? Hold on. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. No apologies.
We got a 2-year-old in the house.
Yeah.
It gets real. So one of the things that happened is this therapist that I work with, at some point, my dad couldn't afford to send me any more money. And this guy actually offered to do pro bono and sliding scale services, which I had never even thought that was an option, right? So like, once again, I just want to kind of lay out for this audience, like what it's like to be a therapist, but also seeking therapeutic services for the first time. I had issues with my environment, right? So issues with school, issues with meeting my demands and meeting even those professional and personal aspirations. Then I also had struggles with how do I get my family to financially support this like healing process that, I'll put it this way. When I did my first, when I graduated from school, my dad was like, oh, Fab, I didn't really know that you could make a business out of feelings, like you didn't even believe that was a reality, So here I am, like telling him, I not only am I like spending a lot of money to go to school, but now we got to spend a little bit more money to get like personal help. So I was throwing all these things. So he explained pro bono and sliding scale services, and I'll never forget what this man said. I was like, how am I supposed to repay you for spending this time? I know that you could charge for another person. And he told me, he goes, listen, Fabrice, he goes, one day you're going to be in the position to give that back. And I just want you to know that that's what we have to do. I mean, and it was such an enlightening and like I said, that experience, even with a white therapist. And I could go into the fact that like, we didn't talk about racism. There's a lot of things that were not discussed on the table. So I want to say that with a little bit of an asterisk. There can be things that you said, Carl, there can be unique cultural experiences that Brittany's talking about when she's saying that she's relatable. There are unique cultural experiences that you may not get from every therapist. So you need to make sure that you're doing your education, you're educating yourself as much as possible on the person you're working with. But I was fortunate enough to have a therapist that was open to me, was open to my financial situation, and felt that he could see a value in helping and assisting me to do what I do now. And I'm living that reality, and I'm hoping to repay that gift that he gave to me as much as possible.
That's good stuff, man. That's good stuff.
Thank you for both of you for tying that in with, Chris's mission as well, because when we talk about, again, obstacles to mental health, what is the point of doing all these things and why it's so essential? You also brought up other realities that are part of the bigger picture that, we will need more, why Conversations Cafe and a lot of other people are having discussions that need to be ongoing, because there's a whole can of worms there. I mean, let's talk about the fact that, the idea of youth or young adults and having their mental health validated, that whole, just that general large picture. But then let's talk about, especially for persons of color and mental health when you're younger being validated in a school system. And, whether you touch on a topic of like adultification of youth. So you've got young females and males whose mental health isn't necessarily the first thing that's thought of when they have emotional or performance issues inside of a school system, right? They're thought of in punitive and behavioral disruption ways, and they're punished and suspended. And that's, part of, if people talk about the old, school to prison pipeline or whatever, disruptions in school, suspensions and things like that are a huge contributor. And that's a monstrous topic that is directly layered in an inability or refusal to appreciate the individual intersectional experiences of what, how an African-American, how a Latinx individual, how someone of color might express themselves may not look the same as someone else. Moreover, you see statistically that educators, predominantly in the American public education system, being predominantly Caucasian, educators tend to look at brown folks and black folks and think in punitive measures before they think in emotional measures. So where person A, who may be Caucasian, could have an outburst in class. By consistent research in state and national survey levels, we see that the Caucasian person, the response might be, well, send them to the counselor and see what's wrong.
Right.
And for the person of color, it's, well, you're acting up. Why don't you ever get stuff straight? Send them to detention, et cetera, et cetera. That's, to do that conversation justice, everyone's gonna have to come back again. We're gonna, and I don't, but why I'm bringing that up though, is because we will never ever make an improvement on that if there aren't three parts to this. If there aren't, first, folks in direct services who have become aware and actively try to endeavor. And I'm glad, Dr. Fabrice, you brought up that, you know what, not everyone has to grow up in the same neighborhood. Not everyone has to speak the exact same language to make an adjustment to connect with someone on your mental health. What becomes effective for someone, for you listening right now, or in days after, what becomes effective in terms of mental health services is really much an individual experience. You may need someone who looks like you, sounds like you kind of feel like they fit and understand you. Someone else, you may just need someone who can listen and respect the dignity of your individuality. And that person may not look anything like what you thought. You may have thought, you know, if you're a male, you may have thought you're only going to talk to an older, you know, stronger, you know, masculine guy. And you may find yourself talking to someone younger than you and a different gender than you and a different race than you. And that becomes the person you connected with. When we talk about facilitating conversations the way coffee, hip hop, and mental health creates these platforms, it's so scary and intimidating to expect someone to just cold call a clinician, that these kind of experiences where I can put my toe in the water and I can see a Brittany and I can see a Dr. Fabrice on a panel and hear them there, that becomes such a powerful bridge for a lot of people. So I want everyone to sort of pay attention that the goal in changing to these conversations, we need both platforms for open discussion. We obviously need the clinicians who are ready to put in the work and make the innovations. And then the third part is, if you're listening right now or watching right now or engaging this content in the podcast in days and weeks after, your step is just understanding, you know, when hopefully he talks about it's okay not to be okay, it's understanding that you have a right to secure mental health services. Something Dr. Fabrice and Brittany both said is being able to understand yourself, respecting yourself, and having the right to make a connection for services. You're not weak or broken or anything of that matter, or any other thing that might have been fed to you in your family, among your friends or peers, or things you just picked up in the air of pop culture to go out and get mental health services. And so with our time here tonight, I kind of want to drive home on two parts here. One, I want to circle back to food insecurity and drive home on ways to strengthen our community. But first, before we do that, I'd like, you know, as I say often, as Chris will attest, you know, Brittany and Dr. Fabrice, we're going to definitely want to have you back on again. You know, we're good at doing that, so we'd like to have you back on again. But if you could sort of share with our listeners and people who may be engaging this later, people who are maybe on the fence, people who are maybe questioning going to, they see a coffee, hip hop, and mental health event, or maybe they just heard you all tonight and they're thinking like, maybe I should start a conversation. Yeah. And they may be thinking money wise, they may be thinking they never thought about mental health before. What might be just a little bit of insight, a little nudge thought you could give to them? Just they're wondering, you know, maybe. I'll start with Dr. Fabrice.
You know, that's such a powerful question. And one of the reasons why I call my organization For Real Therapy is because I wanted it to represent a challenge. I wanted to create a therapy practice that felt like it had something tangible at the end of it. I didn't want something that felt like an abstraction or was removed from the people. So I think one of the things that I think is important is to remember that therapists are people too, right? They have aspirations, they have values, they want to grow. They also have a desire to really assist. I think the majority of them have a real true passion and desire and integrity when it comes to wanting to help and assist and facilitate dialogues and discussions. I think one of the things that people will have to do is you're going to have to reach out, right? So the first initial thing is reach out to a therapist. Even if you don't think that that's the right therapist for you, often just by reaching out and trying to connect with them, they'll respond and they'll say, well, I don't know if I'm the right person to handle that particular issue, but let me see if I can find someone for you that would be. And in Chicago, especially, like, we all exist in small circles. Like Chicago, everybody interlinked and interrelated, right? So in a lot of ways, I get a lot of client referrals through other therapists who know me personally, who work with me, who have worked with me, who are connected with other clients that I sent their way. So there's a lot of different links here. So I just want to emphasize to people that if you're in this place where you're contemplating starting therapy, but you're also feeling like kind of overwhelmed and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do, Fab? Like, you're talking about like 86% white, or 86% of people maybe don't really represent my value system, or they don't fully know, or I'll feel uncomfortable going into this place. I would say just expose yourself at least to giving a call, sending an email. Starting that dialogue is literally where you move from being in your head with things and you move it into your body. And once you start moving things into your body, the world is going to respond back to you. It's going to push back against that effort and that force. So it would really, really be to try to start a dialogue. You can call your insurance if you have insurance. You can call your what is called employee assistance programs, EAPs. A lot of work, even if you're working at Trader Joe's, even if you're working for some big Fortune 500 company, a lot of them offer some form of employee assistance program because they have an incentive for you to be mentally okay, so you could get back to work. Right? I hate how that capitalism functions that way, but that's how it works. So we got to use it to the best of our ability.
Thank you very much. Brittany?
Yeah, so in addition, Dr. Fabrice, he laid it out pretty much very clearly on like how you can start those steps. I also tell people to, a lot of us are on social media, a lot of different types of professionals and a lot of people who need help from different types of professionals or are seeking services of some kind. So I usually tell people when they're not exactly sure, you can start there. Like as far as even just learning more about what mental health looks like, what it entails, and just different components of it is like, you go on Instagram and you search the hashtag therapy or mental health, you're going to get so many things, as well as just not being afraid to at least start the conversation with somebody in your network, in your community, your friend group, because again, as you talk about it, it gives other people permission to discuss and say, oh, well, I know my cousin went to such and such. And so if you're thinking about it, I might be able to point you into the right direction. And you just know without having that discussion. And I bring social media back into it is the beauty that we have today that we didn't have before is a lot of your potential clients or people that could be potential clients have the space to connect with you on social media in some capacity, whether that you have a business page and they can usually, if it's more so a personal page, then you have the conversation about not being able to be friends. But if it's a business page, having those available for people to interact with, like your content, or see what you look like, or see the types of things that you're into, it gives them an opportunity to say like, oh, that person might be a good fit. Like I know today when my friends or people I know reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a therapist, I'm instantly sending therapist profiles that I have, like whether it be their practice or, they operate there to be more professional, but in their bio, they have their website, they have their Psychology Today, they have, where you can find them or reach them. And I find that to be the most efficient because now, I can just search all my counseling and therapy friends and I can just send those to you in masses and you can sit and take the time to like filter through and look. And it's just become way more convenient, and an opportunity for people to read a little bit about you, to see if they feel like you're going to be a good fit and to take that lead.
That's perfect. Chris, this sort of brings us as we sort of wind down tonight. I think this brings us to a perfect point because of the way stigma works, because of the way this conversation is not yet normalized and we push forward on it. Right. An event, the event that is coming up this October 30th and 31st, actually becomes a powerful gateway, because people may engage you and engage the experience. What's promoted as harvest time may engage this experience on the natural necessity of securing food and that part, but it's so consistent that people may not even make the correlation of, I have a mental health challenge, I have something that I could get treatment for, that it's not just a deal with it or tough it out reality. Right. So I think it's important that we also look at there's some of the actions you've got going on before that. So could you just walk us through these public opportunities where people can, basically help start, enter into the conversations?
Yeah.
You get the pop-up. I'm sorry, I'm talking about the pop-up also that's coming up.
Sure. It was so much that was said. From you talked about what happened in school. Brittany and Fabrice both brought interesting points to the table. So I started writing notes. So excuse me, just because whenever we have these conversations, I always see like another way to spark something. So what I'm going to do, and this is a cool announcement, what I'm going to do is, since we have this 2-day free farmers market, what I'm going to do, like after the farmers market on a Sunday, since we're bringing fire pits out, I want to launch a group therapy conversation after the food drive is done, after the farmers market on Sunday, around the campfire. And we're just going to have a conversation about therapy, because that neighborhood needs it. And as much as we can, like, the goal is to always be as spontaneous as we can, because poverty, depression, violence, murder, all this stuff is exasperated. It's passionate and very confidently moving through our streets nonstop. And I feel like it's so extreme that these horrible things are happening that we have to be as extreme, if not more extreme. And I'm just echoing that because I'm super spontaneous, but I love that about me, because I see a need. I try to do my best, like, to create something. So while we was talking, I thought about, man, we have so much time after the farmers market, and I'll go into that. And I really believe if we have 15 people that's standing around, put them around the fire, let's talk, let's have a conversation with a couple therapists, myself, and let's just open up the dialogue. What does mental health mean to you? And that simple question sparks a beautiful conversation. And I thought about that for a couple of reasons, because we don't know what someone's tomorrow is, and we don't know what someone's yesterday was, right? And so a lot of times when people walk into these spaces, we don't know what they're carrying. I thought about that very early, like, man, when we was trying to get insurance for the organization, I was having a hard time because people didn't know what this was. Like, what are you doing, right? And there was no drop-down selection for us to just pick an insurance policy to support this traveling support group. Because when you talk about mental health and triggering people, right, you would be responsible for someone's life if you trigger someone after they leave, which is why we started to prepare the panelists. So we won't just have random conversation, because we have to be responsible, and we have to make sure we're not speaking all these generalizations that sort of make people feel like I am something that I'm not, right? And so that's why we try to whiteboard these situations. This is why I send a ton of questions out, and I ask therapists, is this the way that we should ask you this question based upon your expertise? Because you're also teaching us about language. And Brittany and like Fabrice, especially Brittany, she broke down the importance of language during the AT&T event, which is huge in our community. And so that brings me to the food drive. The reason why we started the food drive, because we understood that poverty is violent. And so when you start looking at the people looting in the city, yeah, I didn't like it. A lot of my friends don't loot. I'm not cut from that cloth, but I understand why people were looting. Right? Sure, there were some people who were just looking for a payday. But when you look at people who are looting grocery stores, right? I don't think the return value on a box of cereal is huge, right? And so people were taking groceries back to their house, right? And so I'm like, yo, poverty is violent. You say people are violent. No, let's look at the bigger issue. When you put our community on the news and you say, look at the people on the South and West Side still having parties. Well, let's look at that a little closely. When you are in survival mode and you are struggling and you have 10 major things on your list that are a problem, when something like COVID, as huge as it is, because it is invisible, it becomes number 11. And I don't got time for that right now. I got to live and figure life out. And when you're living in survivor mode, you have a poor mindset, you're not functioning from a strategic mindset. So everything you do is about how do I get through the day? And everything is an emotional response. And then we start looking at, okay, well, people have been furloughed and laid off and they closing grocery stores and CVS's and Walgreens and they're not open these stores. And so even a person who was making 65, 80,000 a year, now they don't have any funds and they have to rely on limited food stamps, or if they're waiting for a stimulus package, or if they're on unemployment. The reality is when you go to a lesser fixed income, you become insecure in a lot of places, especially food, right? And so I said, poverty is violent, number one, which look at Chicago as residentially segregated. It is. And I say that because it is an intentional thing across America and all the big metropolitan cities. White and Black people do not live separate by choice. It was created that way. And now you look on the South Side, when you look at the landscape, it's 240 plus grocery stores in the city of Chicago, if not more, right? But on the South Side and the West Side, they're underserved with fresh produce food markets that are grocery stores. How is that possible? That was intentional. And so I'm like, okay, well, since the city officials, the state level officials, and the federal government are too busy, then the people have to help. And that's why it evolved into the People's Food Drive, because people all over the country were sending their dollars, sending their advice, their wisdom, and sending resources and coming out to volunteer. So I'm like, okay, well, the people have to serve, because the reality is there's a scripture in the Bible that I stand by, and I believe is in Proverbs 2:27-28. And it says, and it talks about, and I'm paraphrasing, when the people are due for a blessing, if it's in your power to give, you're supposed to give it to them. And I'm looking at the city that have all the power to change people's lives, and they're not doing anything. And so I say, I don't have time to knock on that door. So we have to go bold, and we have to say 10,000 families. And the reason why I said 10,000 families, because number one, I meant it. I really meant that. But it was also a marketing ploy, because I knew it would move the city. And then you would get people to start doing more when you start showing them the numbers of how bad it is. So we talked about this before, Carl, that the poverty rate is 20.6% pre-COVID. Well, I talked to some city insiders. So if 20.6% was equivalent to 550,000 people living under the poverty line, and that doesn't count anybody who don't do the census, which are the homeless people living in tent city, right? So it's countless of homeless people who are not accounted for, or the undocumented residents that live in Chicago, right? So now we are in COVID, because it's not post-COVID yet. We're still in COVID. You're looking at 800 to 1 million people who are either food insecure or living under the poverty line. And that's the problem. So I said, I don't want to just give these people just canned goods. So we said, man, how do we serve people really, really well? So I started reaching out to all of these brands, these big brands, holding them responsible. Whatever extra dollars you have, look what the people gave coffee, hip hop, and mental health $54,000 since June. And we spent $57,000 since June. And you know what? That's not even enough. So I raised 54, but another 3 came out of my pocket as I'm waiting for the checks to clear from the people that gave money. But I believe in the sacrifice, because again, I feel like God gave me the responsibility and a little power and influence to help the people who are due for a blessing, right? And so now we're beautifying Boxville. We're laying new mulch. We're putting big balloons up. We're making a big harvest party, putting up big tents, putting down fire pits, putting up big, beautiful flowers. And we are serving the people with love, because people shouldn't be treated as third world citizens in a very thriving country, let alone a very thriving city. Chicago is too wealthy for us to be asking anybody to sponsor a family for $40 or $50. It's really sad if you think about it. It's sad, right? But that's okay though. That's why the people are banding together, serving with coffee, hip hop, and mental health. And not only us, there are 30 other organizations in Chicago who are doing excellent work. My Block, My City, My Hood, excellent work with the elders, right? And then you look at the stuff that you all are doing with just echoing the efforts of what we're doing, right? And so it's so many different programs out there who are all trying. Convoy of Hope, we just partnered with them. And so now we're able to feed people this Saturday. And we're giving out 230 to 40 pound food boxes. And this is the first time we will have ever given away meat. And so we're giving away 8.5 pounds of meat. We're giving away dairy products, produce, fruit, and we're giving away gallons of milk, right? And so we're changing how we're giving and what we're giving so we can really meet the needs of the people, not just for a few days, but hopefully for a week and a half. That's why it's called Harvest Time. So I know I said a lot, but I'm super passionate about this. And I'm also angry. You know, I'm really angry with how we are treating our citizens in America. I'm really angry, which is why I put up a post recently, and I noticed it didn't get a lot of attention. I get a lot of attention all day on my social media, but I intentionally talked about guilt because guilt expires. And I'm telling people, if you're just giving out of guilt, you know what? I personally don't want your guilt dollars. That's me, because I understand that. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm saying that when you're giving from a place of guilt, when you meet your giving quota and you feel good about yourself, you are going to stop. But the Black community has been living under the poverty line for so long that when you look at the wealth gap, a white woman, man, or a child is worth $1 compared to any Black person, which is 10 cents. Just to give it some sort of visualization. That's 90 cents, right? In some cases, it may be even 99 cents. It's really that bad when it comes to the wealth gap, right? And so we're not asking for handouts. We're just asking for help, a leg up, right? And so I don't want people just to be led and motivated by guilt because at some point you don't feel guilty anymore. So I'm thinking about what's going to happen after the election, no matter who wins. What's going to happen? Are you still going to feel compelled to serve any broken community? Not just Black. They're poor white people. They're poor Hispanics, poor Asian, poor, and poverty is a problem in general, right? But I just don't want people to use these situations just as a tax write-off and then they go away, right? Or just as a feel-good measure and they go away. Because people have been dealing with, like you said, in the last 20 years, the conversation about food insecurity has been exasperated even more since the days of COVID. But every time we do these food drives, Carl, Brittany, and like Fabrice, and you all haven't seen them up close, the cars that pull up, we serviced one day at the last food drive, we serviced 475 or 495 cars in one day. We had police, mailmen, we had some of the flyest cars pull up and say, hey man, thank you for doing this. I appreciate this. And it's been that way since June. You don't know who's gonna pop in that line and they're not picking up food for someone else. And so poverty is violent, evolved into the People's Food Drive so we can better serve. The reason why we wanted to do the farmers market, because we wanted to treat people with love. We wanted to beautify people, beautify the land and beautify them, because we understand in closing that we're not feeding the needy, but we're feeding the eager, people who are eager to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah. Thank you for really laying that down, because that's probably the perfect way to sort of round out this video. I don't want to, add anything more to that, because that just drives it home. I mean, we'll never be able to get as comprehensive a conversation going as we want, but that's such a perfect way to round out tonight. And Chris, thank you for your powerful words. And I want to thank Brittany and Dr. Fabrice for your essential contributions tonight. We will be sure to make sure the event postings are linked up and they're visible and live, and we'll also be showing where you can find For Real Therapy as well. And I just want to thank our guests so much, Chris, Brittany, Dr. Fabrice. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, because if you haven't already been blessed and benefited by the great conversations that happened tonight and Chris's closing words, I want you to really listen and go back and try and marinate on these ideas, because another way to look at this is you may not feel you need to start a conversation for yourself, but you can also be a part of the solutions of starting conversations for others. You can volunteer with Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health. You can volunteer with Hope for the Day. You can volunteer casually and informally just by encouraging your friends and peers to watch these episodes, to engage on the websites and do research, help them do research in finding clinicians if they have questions. If you feel you're in a stable place and, normal is just a setting on a washing machine, but if you feel like you're managing as best you can, but you know someone who's in pain or finds themselves struggling, you can be that person who breaks the silence for them. And you don't have to have all the answers or know all the definitions or anything. If you just point them in the direction of resources such as what we've learned from Dr. Fabrice and Brittany, point them towards events that you see from Hope for the Day or Coffee, Hip Hop, and Mental Health. That's a way that you can make a direct impact in your community beyond the very imperative topics that we've already talked about tonight.
Can I make one more comment as well? I'm sorry.
Please do. Absolutely.
The last thing I want to say as well is one of the things that I specialize in wanting to do more of is working with these organizations who are creating these spaces. Like, I have people ask me, like, well, when are you going to do an event? I don't feel like that's my lane. My lane is to go and to share the knowledge. So please, in the event that anybody is looking to have a professional come and facilitate a conversation, whether that be a workshop or to speak to students, to speak to an organization, to speak to a group of friends, I am literally available to kind of do all of that work. And you can definitely find me on my website, www.bethechangeTS.org, or on Instagram at BeTheChangeTS. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because we're talking about how people can create more conversation. And in the event that you want a professional there, I even do, like I said, I do intervention. So if you have a family member that you're like, I want them to really start to take this seriously, but I don't know where to start, I'm always available. So I just wanted to extend myself as a resource in that way as well.
Perfect. Nice. Thank you. And so let's just, with that said, let me just sort of make a quick lap with just sort of closing words from everyone. Just a few shout outs if you can, as we wind down tonight. Dr. Fabrice.
Yeah, thank you everybody for having me on. Being able to be in this position where, as a therapist and someone in the mental health field, that I can feel the love and the passion, the creativity and the ingenuity. Those are the things, to me, the markers of mental health are not depression and anxiety. These are things that all human beings feel. The markers of mental health are our ability to be curious, our imagination, and our ability to engage in community. When you have deficits in those areas, that's when you truly have mental health issues, right? So being able to participate in organizations like you guys, where you're looking to get people curious about mental health, you're looking to engage community around mental health discussion, and you're getting people to imagine situations and worlds outside of the kind of, messed up environments and messed up, priorities that we have in this country. That's powerful. So thank you so much. To anyone listening, feel free to follow me on Instagram at For Real Therapy. I'm trying to use my platform in education to bring it in a way that feels tangible and realistic to you. So feel free to follow that. I'm also attempting to expand my organization, hire people on, and as things grow, hopefully be able to offer pro bono services and lower those barriers that we face to get mental health access. So
Nice.
See what I'm doing.
Nice.
Thank you. Speaking about, Brittany, just sort of sign off for us.
Absolutely. So the one thing I felt like I didn't want to leave here without saying is, I told Chris, as much as this was like a strict passion for him, like out of his own good heart, I told him that the People's Food Drive was so on brand, because what we don't talk about enough is Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the systemic situation that affects our ability to be better as far as our mental health. Black people are the biggest population of people who have some of the highest numbers when it comes to mental health issues, yet we receive the least amount of help, whether that's because we don't have the resources or because we don't have the education, but it's still a systemic issue. So the fact that we, have Chris in a place where he's like, I want to feed people. The reason why people go to residential treatment when they are at their lowest and they don't have, they have to have that highest level of care, is to provide them with safe housing, with food, so that they can focus on their mental health. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that we cannot self-actualize, we cannot be our best selves, we cannot focus on our mental health when the things, our security, our food, our shelter, the place, our environments are in shambles. It just doesn't make sense. I can't sit here and worry about my self-esteem or my depression when I have to figure out how I'm going to put food on the table or how I'm going to pay my gas bill, or where I'm going to live. We have to, I want to encourage people that as much as it's as easy to say, therapists should see people for free, or we would love to just do pro bono work, we're people as well. And we need to be talking to the people in our city, these people up top, the people who really influence systemically what we need in our communities in order to do better. So thank you, Carl. Those are my last words.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah. Oh, man. You said something earlier, about school. Well, you mentioned school, and so I'm gonna close on this. And this is a whole nother conversation. I actually posted about this because from 1st to 8th grade, like my kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Love. Like her name was Mrs. Love, and trust me, this woman was every bit of love. And I wish I can find that woman. I don't know if she's still alive, but she was such a beautiful person. But from the time I went to 2nd grade, she was my kindergarten teacher. But from the time I went to 1st grade to 8th, every one of my teachers either sat me by the coat closet, next to their desk, or in the back of the class in the corner, or outside of the classroom, because they couldn't quote unquote handle me. None of them could see the signs of an abused child. I don't know if this makes sense, but imagine when you go home, you know that you gotta be quiet, don't move. Maybe you're gonna get locked in the basement. You just know that it's gonna be bad from the time you get home to the time you go to school. And so as a child, I learned how to just have all the fun in the world at school. I couldn't really focus on work. I couldn't sit still. I was always looking for attention. I was always looking for some sort of validation. But the teachers would label me as a disruption, as being bad. And I had like this incredible stuttering problem. And I smelled because I wasn't taken care of. So I was neglected. But no one saw the signs. And they labeled us wrong. And then when I became a teenager, shepherd through the group homes, they labeled me as a delinquent. And they placed me on antidepressants, this pill called Boost Bar. And they put me in LD classes, even though I was an intelligent kid. And so my closing remarks is pay attention to the signs beneath what is actually happening in front of you, whether that may be an adult, a child. The reality is people are hurting, and we're all finding ways to get through the day. And sometimes we lash out, but I'm asking people to look for the signs, to see what's happening with people. Really look closely. If you are in a relationship with people, listen to people, continue to make space, because people are, and I say this all the time, they're either going to explode or implode. I think every shooting, every mass shooting that happened in America was someone exploding or imploding. Anyone who's murdering somebody, who is picking up a gun and shooting in our community or across the country, they're either exploding or imploding. And it's not an excuse. It's not okay. But I just want our people to just look at the signs.
Thank you, Chris. And that's probably the best way, we could wrap up tonight, is making sure we have all of your insights. The work that we try to do, Conversations Cafe is another platform, and it's a part of Hope for the Day's mission. And Chris, talking about the signs and talking about the work that Brittany and Dr. Fabrice do, Hope for the Day's role is really providing education. We hope we can create a movement of changing social policies that one day can lead to changing institutional policy. And our goal in all of this is to try to get people to be able to recognize the earliest signs and symptoms of mental health challenges and start those conversations before we reach crisis. But the fact of the matter is that that's a very long-term work trajectory, because we are in a society that, because the stigma is long before we were over here, long before there was a Facebook, long before whatever politics are of a point today, we created an institution and a community that treated mental health reactively. And we only wait for people at that end point, at that crisis stage, to reach out for supports. And we barely even make it okay to identify oneself in the crisis stage. And there's a lot of severely deleterious outcomes that come from that. Violence and projecting out behaviors is unfortunately at least a causal outcome from untreated and undertreated mental health issues. Self-harm and self-destructive behavior is a far more consistent one as well. And what I hope all of you leave here tonight is understanding, not being intimidated by the scope of the things that we've touched on, but feeling empowered by the fact that there's things we can be doing for ourselves and for our communities. Working towards food security is a direct action on mental health. Helping yourself or someone start a conversation to get services, helping them not be intimidated by navigating, well, how much is this going to cost me? Helping them attend an event where people just talk unhindered by fear of looking weak, or unhindered by looking wild or crazy. Being mindful that someone's behavior should be connected to a mental health question and not thought of as if they're a defect or a behavioral thing. All of these are ways that you can make a direct action on improving the realities of mental health in our communities and systems. And that's ultimately the thing we want you to take home tonight, is that you've just connected with people here who aren't just talking, they're doing. And you can be a part of that doing, because it's an everyday thing we have to do. That's what normalize ultimately means. We kept saying this word through all these different intersections: normalize, normalize, normalize. What normalize means is that the conversation doesn't end tonight. You didn't just watch this, you didn't just listen to this and you stopped. You don't just wait to talk about this on the awareness day. Awareness days are great. Holidays and recognition days are wonderful, and strategically there's a use for them. But that every single day you now put it into your thought process and reorient your mind to think and look at the world in terms of valuing mental health and the real experiences. If you do that, you are joining and taking a direct action in your own way. You don't have to become a millionaire. You don't have to go out and do 10,000 hours of some sort of community service. Just by making an impact for yourself and your peers, you can make a change. And there are other ways to get involved. So I want to thank all of our amazing esteemed guests for joining us. Brittany, Dr. Fabrice, Chris, thank you so much for being our guests. Conversations Cafe cannot happen without our amazing production team. So I want to thank Mike Van Opel, Rick Osowski, and Vicky Cisnet, as well as homies Macy and Angel, and all the wonderful folks at Hope for the Day who help make Conversations Cafe and our efforts a reality. And I want to thank, most importantly, all of you, the guests and audience, for watching tonight or listening in days afterwards, because ultimately we do all of this to support and benefit you. And if you can just remember, it's okay not to be okay. We're one step closer to being able to change things and make things better. So thank you all and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
This is Christopher LeMark, and I am from 6453 South Hermitage. If it wasn't for the things that happened at 6453, coffee, hip hop, and mental health would not exist. When I started coffee, hip hop, and mental health, I wanted to really leverage my story to tell people, even though you go through all the different things, all the different traumatic events, that you really can come out of it. Growing up on 6453, it was tough. We were abused. We were neglected. And I had a complicated relationship with food because it wasn't like we had the freedom to go in the fridge or go in the cabinet. So when you think about food insecurity or bad food hygiene, I understand what that all means. Everything that has happened in the last 6 months, the unfortunate spread of COVID, as an organization, we had to pivot. It was a no-brainer for us to start raising money so we can start feeding people. And so on June 13th, we fed 100 families. Then on July 5th, we teamed up with Mariano's and we fed 1,000 families. This is the People's Food Drive. And I'm asking all of you who are watching, text donate.feed-shy to 77948. Help the South Side. Help us deal with food insecurity and food deserts. We need your help. And next, all roads just lead to suicide prevention.